Hey there. Welcome to the Pelvis Project podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Roxi. We're two pelvic health experts brought together by passion for our careers, entrepreneurship, motherhood, and the desire for intentional relationships.
Join us in our mission to spread pelvic floor awareness and start conversations surrounding the truth behind genuine health, imperfect wellness, and joyfully navigating life. We are so glad you are here with us.
Let's start the conversation. Hello, everybody. This is going to be a little different episode, a little bittersweet. I am coming at you solo. Megan had just a change up of rhythms this week and is unable to make it for a recording. And we have a fun guest for you that we were planning on. We're going to do that next episode, so hold tight for that. It's going to be a good one. But I'm coming at you today solo, and so I'm feeling a little lonely without my bestie, but I'm excited because we have some really good questions. We're just going to do a Q&A. We've had some good questions submitted and asked by non-pelvic floor therapists or experts. And so that always feels good to be able to speak into questions that people actually have. So I'm going to do the best I can by myself. Also know that Megan would input a lot of really good stuff if she were here. So you get me. So anyway, we're going to dive in. There's a handful of questions here, and I probably won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll see what we can do here. So first one is, I have been reading a lot about pelvic relaxation and its importance. What are your favorite tactics/ways to explain relaxing the pelvic floor? I love this question. I love that this question is thrown out here because I love the fact that people are seeing more about the relaxation side of the pelvic floor function. And I mean, if we just really step back, the pelvic floor, just like every other muscle in our body, is meant to contract. It's also then meant to relax. And that can be a really hard skill to teach and to learn. So if this is the first time that you're hearing that, then I want you just to consider that just as much as strength is important, so is relaxation. My favorite tactics or ways to explain relaxing the pelvic floor, that's a hard one because it's a very holistic, whole body kind of approach. And so I really like, though, when I actually kind of take people away from the pelvic floor to do this and connect them with other parts of their body that are tense. And so doing just like body scans or visualizations where you're imagining, what your body's actually doing. And so if it's taking a deep breath, or if you are doing any kind of stretch and you're just saying, oh, what's my hamstring doing right now? It's lengthening. And then that helps the brain start to kind of connect with those areas in ways it normally wouldn't. And then being able to do that to the pelvic floor. So I don't know if that answers that question very well, but it's a hard thing because everyone's so different and things click in our mind in different ways. And so I think really helping people connect with their body in different ways is really fun to see because then there's a lot of good byproduct that happens and ripple effect that happens. I feel like I should ask Megan what her answer is, but she's not here. So sorry about that. This next one is interesting too. I really like it as well. It says, what is the best ways to hold our kids? I saw rocking forward and backward is best compared to side. Is that true? I don't know that I want to hold the final answer on this, but I think that I think if we ever say something is always bad or always good or the best or the worst or things like that, I think that's a little bit bold sometimes to say. So I could see value in rocking side to side. I can justify where that would be valuable still, and that would be beneficial for our body. So I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that there are some really good ways when we're holding our kiddos, some things to consider. And I really advocate for mamas to stack their rib cage over their pelvis. And so they have kind of an upright, neutral position. A lot of times we want to pop that hip and kind of crunch the side and have our kiddo literally sit on our hip bone and kind of create a little shelf for them to rest on because our arms are tired and our back is tired and our core is tired and all the things are tired, right? But I feel like that can be a ripple effect into other problems or just compensations and asymmetries in the body. And so I like to just challenge mamas to stand up tall and feel their core hold them up, and feel their hips kind of hold them up too, and put more work into some of those muscles rather than kind of relax everything and malalign our body in that way. I could see where forward and backward would be helpful. And I could also see where side to side is. Sometimes that's an exercise I actually give people, of just load transfer and feeling the weight transfer across their pelvis and across their core from one leg to the next. And so I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think there's a good way to do both of those, and there can be a less than ideal way to do both of those. So not a solid answer on that, but I think it's interesting to think about. And I love that people are just even considering that and being curious about their bodies. Is there a better way to do this? And I really like questions like that. So let's do this one. I'm kind of skimming through a few here that we can circle back to. But this is a really interesting one for anyone who has had a hysterectomy or thinks they're going to. It says, how does the pelvic floor change after a hysterectomy? And things to help strengthen your pelvic floor post-hysterectomy. So the pelvic floor anatomy doesn't change really after hysterectomy. Now, the procedure changes the anatomy, and, a hysterectomy can mean a lot of different things, whether, if that's just like part of the uterus, the full uterus, the ovaries also, the cervix also. That's all above the pelvic floor. So the pelvic floor sits underneath that and supports that area. And so with a hysterectomy, when those organs and those tissues are removed, pelvic floor itself doesn't actually change anatomically. But I think we need to consider that if there's hormone changes, then the muscles are going to have a different impact. So when there's inflammation following the procedure, then that causes the pelvic floor to act differently too, and maybe guard a little more. If there's pain, obviously, it's going to guard a little more. Usually with that, obviously, there's scope sites or incision sites. And with that comes scar tissue, and the abdominal wall is compromised. And so then the pelvic floor changes how it responds during that season. And sometimes it builds up a bad habit. So that is kind of my thoughts on, or my perspective, I would kind of challenge on. The pelvic floor doesn't actually change, but the environment around it influences it to work differently sometimes. Then I think this next question is just a really big question. Things to help strengthen your pelvic floor post-hysterectomy. Basically, how Megan and I really like to treat is whole body. And so the pelvic floor works as one piece of the puzzle. To strengthen the pelvic floor looks a lot of different ways. A lot of times, we want to make sure that the pelvic floor, you can connect with it. And you know how that when you're squeezing it, that it's actually squeezing, because that's a misconception a lot of times, is people assume they're squeezing their pelvic floor, when in reality, the actual byproduct of what's happening with that cue is not a squeeze. And that's a kind of a problem then that we have to tackle right away and correct that. But then helping the pelvic floor work in a bigger system so that when you are just doing your day-to-day tasks, then it's strengthening. If you're using your body correctly, if your core is working well, if your body mechanics are correct, if you're managing the pressure inside your abdomen well, those are all things that influence the pelvic floor to have good range of motion and mobility. We kind of hit on that with the first question of relaxation. If a muscle can lengthen, then it can squeeze really well. Things to help strengthen your pelvic floor is to make sure that all the pieces of the puzzle are there and they're working correctly and they're working as a team together. And then using that, being active, just the day-to-day things that you do are helpful. And then any workouts, any exercise, anything like that, then that you're supplementing into your day, there's going to be a byproduct of the pelvic floor becoming stronger because of that activity. That's kind of a really general answer to that. But in general, when we think about strengthening the pelvic floor, if it's working correctly as a unit, like a unit of the body, and all the other parts of the body are working well with it, then being active is the way that you strengthen it. Let's see. Ooh, we have a lot of pregnancy questions, and there's some good ones here. Okay, tips for when you're pregnant on not arching your back and not having good posture. And this question, she says, is for working out and also just with normal standing. How do we do that? If you think about when your body is not pregnant versus when a body is pregnant, one of the big anatomical changes is that the front of our body lengthens. It pulls forward. Our center of mass moves forward. And so inevitably, the front of our body gets long and the back of our body gets really short. And this is where, this isn't the question, but this is where mom butt comes in. A lot of times it sneaks in because when muscles are longer than they're supposed to be, or muscles are shorter than they're supposed to be, then they become weaker. And so when our core stretches and lengthens during pregnancy, it still works. It's just hard to be as strong when you're at the end of your pregnancy. It's hard for the core to stabilize as well with the movements and the tasks that you did pre-pregnancy because it's disadvantaged because the core is longer. In the same way, the muscles in the back then are also short and tight, so they're also weak, and the butt muscles get that way too, and we don't use our butt muscles as efficiently and effectively during pregnancy as we did when we weren't. So I think going back to that concept of stacking your rib cage over your pelvis, so finding the neutral where you're not arched way forward, you're not tucked under, and then stacking your trunk right on top of that, that's going to set the core up to be in the best position possible. And that's really hard during pregnancy. I just want to address that elephant in the room, that it's really hard to do that. So awareness is a big piece of that puzzle of saying, okay, I know my body, I'm pregnant. I know that my body wants to pull forward. And it's up to me to help my body learn where neutral is. And that feels different now than it did when I was not carrying a little human inside. And that takes repetition sometimes. And also knowing every day microscopically, that's a little different as your pregnancy progresses. And so helping your body be really comfortable finding that neutral where you're not really arched forward and your belly's like being pulled forward, but kind of having the discipline then to reset that. We do this a lot just with people that aren't pregnant of finding posture resets. If we have poor posture, I don't think it's realistic for us to believe that we can have perfect posture 100% of the time. And so I a lot of times advocate to patients, like just find like a little accountability task of like every time I check my phone, then I'm going to reset my posture, or every time whatever the task is, I'm going to have that remind me to reset my posture. And it's more of a discipline than it is perfecting it. I hope that helps. But that I think is the best thing is practicing. You can get in front of a mirror and standing and arch your back or rock your pelvis forward, then tuck it under, rock it back, kind of find where is that neutral spot. I think it's wise to do that in sitting too and get really comfortable there and then try to kind of set that and try to maintain that as you squat or as you reach down to grab something or as you're at your desk or something or sitting at the table, trying to find that neutral and give it opportunity and time to be comfortable in that and familiar, I guess I should say, within that position. So that's a really good question. And that isn't, I guess, a challenge for most pregnant women is to try to not fall into that really forward, heavy forward belly during pregnancy. So this next question is really loaded. It's another pregnancy question. And so I'm just going to read it and we'll see where this goes. So bear with me here, but because I have lots and lots of thoughts on this, but this is the person asking basically, but she prefaces it with this. I've had lots of talks with gals about working out in pregnancy. What's normal, what's not. Probably a good thing that the culture definitely supports full-on workouts like while pregnant, for example, CrossFit, but is it okay if you pull back? She says, I know I have, and I get nervous that I either am not pushing enough, am I being lazy and using pregnancy as an excuse, for example, versus pushing too much. And I don't want to cause myself more issues by pushing too hard. Also, I've talked to other friends, and it's definitely a mental hurdle seeing those awesome fitness people working out the day before they are due or in their first trimester while I'm on the couch dying and feeling guilty. So basically this idea of during pregnancy, what's too much, what's not enough, where do we land, how do we reconcile this? And so I think that there's a lot here, and without going too terribly deep with it, I think there's an underlying there's an underlying tone of, am I listening to my body? And do I feel confident making a choice that's best for me in this moment that might look different for somebody else in their moment? I think comparison can be very helpful and drive us to be better, but I think it can be very detrimental and shameful or cause shame in us. And I mean, I'm hearing a lot of that just in this question of like, man, I'm looking at other people. And that's what we do. That's how we learn. That's how we gauge kind of where we're at. So I'm not coming against comparison at all, but I think this is just a really raw and real kind of dilemma that we find ourselves in. And I think that having the confidence to say, I'm the expert of my body right now. And I think you can find here's a soapbox I won't get on. You can find probably a research article to support anything that you want to believe or you want to be right on. The research shows that it's safe to work out and to lift a lot of weight if you've been doing that, that you can continue to do that. I think then that there's also some times where we have to, we obviously have to appreciate that our body is doing a lot of extra work during pregnancy. And I think we underestimate that too. So to get kind of to the point, maybe, or to answer, maybe bring some clarification or clarity, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, to this question is, I think, appreciate where you are baseline. When you are pregnant, don't start trying to lift big weights during your pregnancy. I'm not saying you can't, but the gals that you see doing that were doing that before they were pregnant. And so I think be real of saying, what was I doing? What was my activity level during pregnancy? And using that a little bit of a gauge. Now, if you were sedentary and you are like, wowza, I need to make a change, there's nothing wrong with starting an exercise program during pregnancy. Like, your muscles can still get stronger. Your endurance can still improve. Like, you still are a human body that functions the same way. There's just a little bit of differences we have to keep in mind. So I'm like, it's hard because I think a lot of absolutes can be taken out of this conversation, this context. And I don't want that at all. And I think giving ourselves a lot of grace, listening to our body and being confident that today might be different than yesterday and today might be different than tomorrow. So what felt good yesterday might not feel good today. And saying, okay, I'm listening to my body and today maybe requires a little more rest or a lighter activity or a relative rest. So maybe not doing nothing, but doing less than what I would like to be doing if I were nauseous and exhausted, right? I don't know if that actually answers anything. I feel like I've kind of talked in circles, but any exercise has the power to be harmful and to be helpful. It's all how you do it. So as far as pushing too hard, I think our bodies tell us probably if we're pushing too hard. I think being realistic with expectations is wise, and listening to our body. That's probably the biggest thing here, is listening to your body and saying, this is what's best for me today. What level of activity, what kind of activity, how much activity, and is the healthiest thing for me today to be overly active or given excess of activity, or is the healthiest thing for me today to rest? In that first trimester, sometimes the best thing for our body is to rest and have a snack and, do activity that doesn't feel as productive as normal. And that's okay. I think there are some times, though, that we can use that as an excuse to just eat whatever we want and not do anything. And that's not the best thing for us that day. And so really tapping into what's best for my body, and is that what I chose? And trying to block out the comparison. That's the best thing you can do, is stay in your lane and tell yourself, I was created to be this baby's mama. And it doesn't matter what other babies' mamas are doing right now. This is what's best for me and my growing baby. And that's what's best. And I'm not going to worry about what anyone thinks of that or what anyone else is doing, and looking beyond what feels comfortable, so that if you feel like you're being lazy, I think you're going to know that you're being lazy. And so then if you get into a workout and you feel like you're pushing it too hard, you're going to know that you're pushing it too hard. And so really getting in tune with your body and listening to it is the best thing moving forward from there. Okay, let's do one last one here. And this is related to pregnancy, but it doesn't have to be. So this is kind of a general one. It says, can you explain bracing from the bottom versus bracing by wrapping in from the sides, particularly while walking long distances during pregnancy? So you don't have to be pregnant for this to listen to this. So this is for anybody. Bracing from the bottom versus bracing by wrapping in from the sides. So sometimes when we brace, we should have like a canister happen. So the pelvic floor is on the bottom, the core is like the sides of a can, and then you have your diaphragm on the top. And so if you're bracing correctly with your TA, which is the deepest core, that's our best core, like that's the OG of stabilizers in our abdomen, that comes in like a corset. But when that happens, the pelvic floor also lifts at the same time if we're coordinating that correctly and if we're doing that correctly. There's connections between the both. They are best friends, basically. The core and the pelvic floor are best friends. When we brace, if you only feel like your side's sucking in, then a lot of times that's going to be a little more oblique and not TA. So there's still core muscles. It's not 100% wrong. It's just not correct. And so when the TA braces, we should feel this like in and up feeling of bracing. Okay. So that's bracing from the bottom, I guess you could say, where I think sometimes when we brace from the sides only, that can become more dominant with the obliques and some of the other core muscles and not as like holistic of a brace. And when that happens, then we squeeze in from the sides, and that can sometimes put a lot of downward pressure on the pelvic floor, especially during pregnancy, but just anybody in general. We want the pelvic floor and the core to work together because then they vibe off of each other, they influence each other, and hopefully positively, and they keep each other then active and strong and doing their jobs, basically. Okay, one thing I want you to take away from this question is I really try to avoid cueing people to consciously brace and squeeze and hold. Okay. The core can brace without you micromanaging it in a sense. And so I'm going to come back to this where we talked about earlier, stacking the rib cage on top of the pelvis. That sets the core up. That takes work. Think about like right now in your seat, slouch and then sit up straight. It's effort to sit up straight, right? And so I would challenge you while you're walking, and if you're pushing a stroller, for example, or just walking for exercise, to practice that upright posture. Notice how your core pulls in and not over brace, because if you squeeze even more, then that's not the TA probably really doing the most of the work, and then therefore the pelvic floor isn't stepping up either. And so trying to stand up straight, connect and say, oh, there's my core. I feel it. It's gentle, but it's not gripping as hard as you can, because walking isn't a hard movement. Like we shouldn't be gripping as hard as we can just to walk. And so just appreciating the difficulty level and the effort level should be pretty close as far as our core stabilizing appropriately in that task. I would encourage you to practice just like walking, like looking at what's my body doing. Am I like really leaning? And it's not bad to lean forward necessarily, but like, am I tucking my butt under when I walk, or do I arch? If you're pregnant, are you going into that arched position? That can be really dangerous. Not dangerous, but just detrimental. Really stacking the rib cage over the pelvis so that you're not arching your back like we talked about in the first question, but then feeling that core stabilize you through, and then walking that way and just walking tall and feeling that strength and that stability as you're walking, and not trying to necessarily micromanage it or overbrace with that. Now, if you're then pushing like a stroller, then yeah, you want to stay tall. You want to feel your core push the stroller essentially. Your arms you're going to stay close. You're going to keep that stroller close to you, and you're going to use your core as your stability between your arms and your legs. And then you're going to propel with basically your glutes if you can, or your leg muscles, and maintain that upright position. And that is then how you're going to brace. And it should start to just become habit and natural as you teach it how to do that correctly. So hopefully that helps. Not gonna lie, guys, this felt kind of awkward to just banter by myself. And so I am really excited for Megan to come back. And I'm sure you all are too, because listening to the same voice for a long time probably isn't exactly exciting, but hopefully you walked away with a few nuggets there with these Q&As. And definitely keep them coming. If you have more questions, I think we should do this again. This was kind of fun to just see what curiosities y'all had and what questions you have that would be valuable for other people too. If you have the question, then someone else has the question, right? So I'm really grateful for y'all. And we will, even though this wasn't a conversation, we will keep this conversation going, and Megan will be back with us next time. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Pelvis Project podcast. Help us continue the conversation by liking and sharing this episode with friends. And if you really want to do us a solid, leave us a review. If you'd like to follow us on social, check out the show notes for links. And remember, this week, take a deep breath and relax your pelvic floor.